The sting of his hand across my cheek burned hotter than the steaming bowl of soup I had just set on the table.
"Useless old woman,"
Richard snarled, slamming his fist against the wooden dining table so hard the spoons rattled.
"Can't you do anything right?
No salt, no flavor, what good are you in this house?"
I staggered back, clutching my cheek.
My silver-gray hair slipped loose from the bun I had pinned so carefully that morning. I was 78 years old, and my own son had just struck me across the face over a bowl of soup.
He didn't even flinch.
His wife, Sandra, sat smirking beside him, her arms folded.
"Told you she was slipping, Richard. Can't even handle the basics anymore." Richard pointed at me, his face red with rage. "You think you'll live here for free? You think you'll keep draining me, wasting space in my house? You're lucky I don't throw you out tonight."
I steadied myself, fingers trembling as they brushed the wooden chair for balance.
"This is my house," I said quietly. "I bought it. I raised you in it." His laugh was cold. "Not anymore. You're old, weak, and pathetic. Everything you own belongs to me now."
But what Richard didn't know, what Sandra couldn't possibly imagine, was that the deed to this house had already been secured under my name in a trust that neither of them could touch. Their cruelty had unlocked something inside me, and I wasn't about to let it go unpunished. So before I tell you how I answered back, make sure you subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this is a story of betrayal, of cruelty, and of how an old woman's silence turned into the loudest revenge.
The soup sat untouched, steam curling into the tense air. My cheek still stung, but my mind was sharper than ever.
I took my seat quietly at the end of the table, ignoring Sandra's smirk and Richard's heavy breathing. In that silence, I remembered the boy Richard once was, the boy who used to hug me after a scraped knee, the boy who laughed when I baked his favorite apple pie. Somewhere along the line, greed had twisted that boy into a man who believed love was weakness.
And weakness was something I refused to be.
The next morning, I woke early, as I always did.
My bones ached, but I still moved with purpose.
I brewed coffee, sliced bread, and stood at the stove humming softly. Richard stumbled into the kitchen, his hair messy, his eyes bloodshot from the whiskey he drowned himself in the night before.
He dropped into a chair with a grunt. "Coffee," he barked.
I set the cup in front of him without a word.
He sipped, grimaced, and set it down hard. "Too bitter. You really can't do anything right anymore."
Sandra entered moments later, her silk robe tied lazily at her waist. She didn't even look at me as she slid into the chair beside him. "We should talk about the house again," she said, her voice smooth as poison.
"It's too big for her. She doesn't need it.
We could sell it, get something modern, put her in a nursing home."
Richard grunted. "Soon."
I kept my back to them, scrubbing a pan at the sink.
My hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury.
Later that day, I walked to the lawyer's office downtown. Mr. Holloway greeted me warmly, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose.
"Margaret," he said, "I had a feeling I'd see you again soon."
I sat across from him, my cardigan buttoned neatly, my hair bun tighter than usual.
"I want to be sure the trust is ironclad," I said. "My son, he's changed. I need to know he can't touch a dime."
Mr. Holloway nodded, pulling the thick folder from his drawer.
"Everything is sealed.
The property, the savings, even the investments.
Unless you choose otherwise, Richard has no power." Relief washed over me. Good. Then let him rage. Let him hit. Let him sneer.
He'll find out soon enough what it means to underestimate his mother. When I returned home, Richard was waiting at the door, his arms crossed.
"Where were you?" he demanded. "At church," I lied smoothly. "Praying for patience." He snorted. "You'll need more than prayers when I sell this house." I walked past him, steady and calm. Let him believe what he wanted. The louder he boasted, the harder his fall would be. That weekend, the family gathered for dinner. Sandra had spread word that the house was as good as sold. Cousins and neighbors arrived, curious and buzzing with gossip. Richard raised his glass at the head of the table, grinning wide. "To new beginnings," he declared. "The mansion's going on the market. We'll all benefit soon enough." Murmurs rippled. Some smiled, others looked uneasy. My niece leaned toward me, whispering, "Is it true, Aunt Margaret?" I set down my fork gently. Not yet, I said simply. The words spread like sparks. Richard's grin faltered as whispers circled the table. Sandra's face tightened. I watched them squirm in their own lies, my heart steady, my plan unfolding. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I touched the bruise on my cheek that had faded into yellow. He had hit me over a missing pinch of salt. But soon, Richard would learn the taste of bitterness far stronger than any soup. Because my response was coming. And it would strip him of everything he thought he owned. The bruise faded from my cheek, but the memory of Richard's hand did not. Every time I set food on the table, every time I folded laundry or poured his coffee, I felt that sting. Not just of pain, but of betrayal. A son who could strike his own mother was no son at all, just a stranger wearing the face of the boy I once raised. Sandra, of course, was quick to add her venom to every wound. Richard, really, she's slowing down, she said one morning as I sat quietly at the breakfast table, cardigan wrapped tight around me. If she can't even season soup, how can she manage this house? It's time to make serious decisions. A home like this is wasted on her. Richard grunted into his coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, the desperation of his crumbling business leaking into every movement. I know, he muttered. It's just, she's stubborn. Sandra's eyes flicked to me, cold and calculating. Then make her less stubborn. The words dripped like poison into the room. I kept my head down, buttering toast slowly, but inside my mind was a storm. They thought I was blind, deaf, weak. They thought I had no fight left in me. But they didn't know what I had already put in place. That afternoon, I pulled on my coat and left for town. My legs ached, but each step was steady. I visited the bank, confirming once more that my accounts were secured under my own name, my beneficiaries carefully chosen. Not Richard. Not Sandra. They would inherit nothing unless I allowed it. As I signed the paperwork, the banker glanced at me. Are you certain about these exclusions, Mrs. Hale? It's unusual for someone to remove their direct heir. I smiled faintly. Unusual, but necessary. My son has made his choices. Now I make mine. When I returned home, Richard was waiting. Where were you? He demanded. At the market, I lied smoothly, holding up a small paper bag with apples inside. His eyes narrowed. You're up to something. I brushed past him calmly. And you're always imagining things. But his suspicion had taken root. And suspicion makes the guilty unravel faster than any truth ever could. 2 nights later, I overheard him on the phone in the den. His voice was low, panicked, sharp. I just need more time. She'll break, I promise. The house is mine, you'll have your money soon. My stomach clenched. Whoever was on the other end wasn't a friend. Richard wasn't just greedy, he was drowning in debt. And he thought my house was the lifeboat. I sat in the dark hallway, cardigan pulled tight, listening as he lied, begged, and promised things he couldn't deliver. My heart ached, but not with pity. With certainty. If he thought hitting me over soup was the worst of his sins, he was wrong. His true crime was seeing me as a tool instead of a mother. And tools eventually break the hand that misuses them. The next Sunday, family gathered again. Sandra had spread her whispers wide. Margaret's house will be sold any day now. Richard is handling everything. Cousins arrived with expectant smiles, as though already counting their imagined shares. Neighbors leaned in too close, asking sly questions. Richard, drunk on attention, stood at the head of the table, raising his glass. To the future, he declared, grinning wide. This house will soon give us all a fresh start. Murmurs of approval and curiosity rippled through the room. I sat at the far end, silver hairbun pinned neatly, pale blue cardigan buttoned, hands folded in my lap. I watched them all, silent as stone. Finally, one relative turned to me. Margaret, is it true? You're selling. I set down my fork gently. Not yet. The words cut through the room like a blade. Whispers erupted. Faces turned. Richard's grin faltered. Sandra's eyes flashed with fury. Don't listen to her, Richard said quickly, forcing a laugh. She doesn't know what she's saying. It's already happening. But doubt had been planted. And doubt spreads like wildfire. That night, Sandra cornered me in the kitchen as I washed dishes.
You just had to embarrass him, didn't you? She hissed, her manicured nails digging into the counter.
You could make this easy, Margaret. Sign the papers. Let us handle things. Or do you want to see your son destroyed? I turned to her slowly, drying my hands on a towel. I raised my son better than this. If he's destroyed, it won't be by my hand. It'll be by his own greed. Her eyes narrowed into slits. You'll regret those words. I walked past her, calm as ever. No, Sandra. You will.
In the days that followed, Richard's temper grew sharper.
Every small thing I did became a target. Tea's too weak. You left the porch light on. You folded the towels wrong.
Each complaint was another blow, not with fists this time, but with words sharp enough to cut.
But each time, I answered only with silence. And silence unnerved him more than anything else. One night, as I carried laundry upstairs, he blocked the hallway. His face was flushed, his fists clenched. You're ruining me, he spat. Every time you open your mouth, you make me look weak. Every time you sit there smug, you make me smaller. Do you hate me that much?
I set the basket down gently, looking him straight in the eyes.
I don't hate you, Richard. I pity you. His jaw tightened. His eyes blazed. But for the first time, he had no words. He stormed off, slamming doors behind him. And I knew then, the breaking point was near. The calls grew more frantic. More collectors showed up at the door.
Sandra's smile grew tighter, her whispers sharper. The house was no longer a home, it was a battlefield of lies, anger and desperation.
But I remained steady.
Because while they scrambled in panic, I held the one truth they couldn't touch. The house was mine, sealed, untouchable. And soon, I would show them just how powerless their greed had made them. So when Richard raised his hand against me that first night, he thought he was showing strength.
But in reality, he revealed his weakness. And my response would be the one thing he never expected. I would take back everything. And leave him with nothing.
By the third week after Richard slapped me, the house no longer felt like a place of warmth. It felt like a cage rattling with anger, lies, and desperation.
Every corner carried whispers. Every shadow seemed to hold another scheme.
But I kept moving through it like a ghost, silent but watching, steady as stone. I had lived long enough to know that greed doesn't burn out on its own.
It consumes until nothing is left. And Richard was already being consumed. It began with the collectors.
One gray afternoon, as rain streaked down the windows, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway.
2 men stepped out, sharp suits, polished shoes, cold eyes.
They didn't smile as Richard met them at the door. I stood just inside the hallway, hidden behind the curtain, listening.
You promised us weeks ago, one of them said flatly. Where is the money? Richard's voice cracked, desperate. It's coming, I swear. The house is worth millions. My mother is just stalling. She'll sign soon.
The taller man leaned closer, his voice a growl.
If she doesn't, it's your neck, not hers.
Richard nodded quickly, sweat beading his forehead.
Just give me more time. Please.
The men left without another word, their car vanishing into the rain. Richard closed the door slowly, leaning against it, his face pale as chalk.
I stepped out from the shadows. He jumped when he saw me. Who were they? I asked calmly.
No one, he snapped, his voice too sharp.
Business associates. I raised an eyebrow.
Business associates don't threaten you at the door.
His eyes narrowed. Stay out of it, Mom. This is my problem.
I turned away, my voice quiet but firm.
No, Richard.
You made it my problem when you tried to steal my home. His silence was louder than any argument.
Sandra grew bolder, too.
One evening, as I set plates on the table, she blocked my path, her silk blouse gleaming under the chandelier light.
Margaret, she said, her smile tight, you're being selfish. Don't you want to help your son? He's drowning, and you're sitting on a fortune. What kind of mother does that? I met her gaze evenly.
The kind of mother who knows the difference between help and enabling. You don't want to save him, Sandra.
You want to strip me bare. Her eyes flashed. We'll get that house one way or another.
I set the last plate down, my expression calm.
Try. You'll see what happens.
She recoiled as though my words carried weight heavier than threats. The next Sunday at church, the whispers were deafening. I walked slowly down the aisle, cardigan buttoned, hair bun pinned neatly, my Bible clutched in both hands. Neighbors leaned toward one another as I passed.
I heard Richard's selling the mansion. No, I heard Margaret refuses. Imagine hitting your own mother. I pretended not to hear, but every word stung. Not for myself, but for what Richard had become. He was no longer my son in their eyes. He was a villain. When the service ended, a kind woman touched my arm. Margaret, is it true?
I gave the same answer I always gave.
Not yet.
The words spread again, carried like embers on the wind. Richard stormed out behind me, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with humiliation. He had lied too loudly for too long. And now the lies were catching up.
That night, he snapped.
I was sitting in the living room, knitting quietly, when he burst in. His tie hung loose around his neck, his hair messy, his eyes bloodshot.
You're ruining me, he shouted, pacing like a trapped animal. Do you know what they're saying? Do you know what I owe? You could fix this with one signature, but you won't.
I set my needles down carefully, folding them into the yarn.
Because it isn't yours to fix.
He stopped, glaring at me, fists clenched.
You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you're in control. But you're nothing without me. You're old, weak, and in the way.
I rose slowly, my hand steady on the armrest.
And yet, Richard, I'm still standing. Can you say the same?
His face twisted, his body trembling with rage. For a moment, I thought he might strike me again. But instead he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook.
I sat back down, calm, composed.
The storm had broken in him, and the flood was coming. 2 days later, I caught him in the study. He was rifling through drawers, tossing papers onto the floor, sweat dripping down his forehead.
What are you looking for? I asked from the doorway.
He spun around, startled, his face pale.
Nothing.
I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing.
My trust documents? The deed.
He swallowed hard, saying nothing.
You won't find them here, I said softly. And even if you did, they wouldn't save you.
His face twisted in frustration.
Why are you doing this to me?
Don't you care if I lose everything?
I met his gaze coldly.
You didn't care when you raised your hand to me over soup.
Why should I care now?
He froze, speechless. For the first time, the truth seemed to pierce him. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands, whispering, I just need one chance.
I left him there, broken and small.
Sandra grew desperate, too. She began calling family members, spinning lies, telling them I was senile, that I didn't know what I was doing, that the house was wasted on me. But the more she spoke, the more people doubted. They had seen my composure. They had seen Richard's unraveling. And when whispers turned to pity, for me not for them, Sandra's anger turned cold and sharp. One evening, she hissed at me in the kitchen, You think you're winning, don't you? You think sitting there smug makes you powerful. But when Richard falls, you'll fall too.
I looked her straight in the eyes.
Then let's fall together. We'll see who rises first.
Her face paled. She turned on her heel and left.
The next family dinner sealed it. Richard tried once again to raise his glass, forcing a grin, his voice loud and hollow.
To new beginnings.
But the family didn't cheer this time. They exchanged looks, whispers swirling. My brother Henry finally spoke.
Richard, stop lying.
We all know Margaret isn't selling.
Stop humiliating yourself.
Richard's face crumbled. She's ruining me, he shouted, pointing at me with shaking hands.
She wants me destroyed. All eyes turned to me.
I placed my fork down gently, folded my napkin, and said calmly, No, Richard. You destroyed yourself when you hit your own mother for a bowl of soup.
Gasps filled the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire.
Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. His face turned crimson, his hands trembled. Finally, he shoved his chair back and stormed out, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked softly around me. Richard thought he was still in control, still one signature away from salvation.
But he didn't realize the truth. The house was untouchable. The fortune was sealed. His downfall was inevitable. And the more he fought, the harder he would fall. He had hit me once, thinking I would cower. But soon, he would learn that the quiet strength of a mother is sharper than any slap. And my response was already in motion. By the 4th week, Richard was no longer hiding his desperation. His rage burned hot in private, but in public, he tried to smile, to swagger, to convince anyone who would listen that he was still in control. But lies always leak, and his mask was crumbling faster than he realized. I kept to my routines. I brewed my tea in the mornings, walked through the garden in the afternoons, and read by the lamp in the evenings. I was calm, steady, unshaken. And that calm drove him mad. Because each day, Richard lost another piece of the story he'd built for himself. The collectors came again, and this time they didn't bother with politeness. I was in the foyer when the heavy knock rattled the door. Richard jumped, his face pale, his hand trembling on the knob. When he opened it, 2 men in dark coats pushed their way inside. Their voices were low but sharp, each word slicing through the air. "You're out of time," the taller one said. "Friday was the deadline." Richard's voice cracked. I just need more time. My mother, she's going to sign. The house is worth millions. I can pay you back." The second man's eyes flicked to me where I stood by the staircase, my hands folded calmly over my cardigan. He tilted his head. "That's so." Richard turned, panic flashing in his eyes. "Mom, tell them you'll sign." I held his gaze steadily, my voice calm and cool. "The house is not for sale." Gasps filled the foyer, not from the men who already knew, but from Sandra, who had stepped out of the parlor in her silk blouse, her face tightening like a mask cracking. The taller man stepped closer to Richard. "Then you've got nothing." The air thickened. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting, his body trembling. "Please. Just a week. I'll find a way." The men exchanged a glance, then turned and left without another word. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving silence behind. Richard stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. Sandra's face was pale, her mouth open but silent. I climbed the stairs slowly, pausing halfway. "You thought you could sell me for salt, Richard. But all you've sold is yourself." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Neighbors had seen the black car in the driveway, had noticed the men in dark coats. By Sunday, whispers followed us into church like shadows. "That's Margaret's boy, isn't it? Owes money all over town. Hit his mother, they say. Over soup. And now she won't even give him the house." Richard sat stiffly in the pew beside Sandra, his face flushed, his jaw clenched. Every whispered word cut into him like a blade. I sat calmly with my Bible, my silver hair bun neat, my cardigan buttoned. My silence was louder than his shame. When the service ended, an old friend approached me. "Margaret, tell me, what's really going on?" I smiled faintly. "The truth always shows itself. Just wait." And the truth was spreading faster than Richard could contain it. At the next family dinner, Richard tried once more to pretend. He arrived late, his suit wrinkled, his smile strained. He raised his glass at the head of the table, his voice shaking as he declared, "To new opportunities. The house is still on track. You'll all see soon enough." The cousins exchanged glances. My brother Henry, who had always been quiet, finally leaned forward. "Richard, enough. We've all heard the stories. Collectors at your door. Lies at church. Stop humiliating yourself." Richard's hand shook as he lowered his glass. "It's not lies. She's ruining me." He pointed at me, his finger trembling. "She's doing this on purpose." All eyes turned to me. I set down my fork gently, folded my napkin, and said, "No, Richard. You ruined yourself the moment you struck me for soup. Everything after that was only you finishing what you started." Gasps rippled around the table. Whispers erupted. Sandra's face went white. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, and stormed out, leaving a room of stunned silence behind him. That night, Sandra came to me privately, her voice low and sharp. "You're killing him," she hissed. "Do you want to see your son destroyed? Because that's where this is heading." I folded my hands in my lap. "He destroyed himself. You just handed him the matches." Her face twisted. "You think you've won? Wait until he's gone and you're all alone in this house. Let's see how proud you are then." I looked her straight in the eye. "I'd rather sit alone in dignity than live surrounded by thieves." She turned on her heel, her silence saying more than words ever could. The pressure cracked Richard further. His voice on the phone grew louder each night, no longer pleading but sobbing, begging, breaking. "I can't pay. I don't have it. Please don't do this." I listened from the shadows, my heart heavy but resolute. His downfall was inevitable. And now it wasn't just coming, it was here. 2 days later, the final confrontation came. A storm raged outside, thunder shaking the windows. Another heavy knock rattled the door, but this time, the men didn't come alone. Family members had gathered too, drawn by whispers, by rumors, by curiosity too heavy to ignore. Cousins, nieces, nephews, they filled the foyer as the men stepped inside. "Time's up," one of them said flatly. "You pay tonight, or we take what we can." Richard fell to his knees right there in front of everyone. "Please. Just give me one more chance. My mother, she'll sign, she has to." He turned to me, his eyes red, his voice broken. "Mom, please. I'm begging you. Don't let them ruin me." Every eye turned to me. The room held its breath. I stepped forward, my cardigan buttoned, my silver hair bun neat, my hands steady. "The house is not his to sell. It never was. Everything is secured. He has nothing to give you." Gasps erupted. Whispers surged. The men nodded grimly, their suspicions confirmed. Richard collapsed fully onto the floor, sobbing, his hands clutching at the rug. I looked down at him, my voice quiet but sharp. "You struck me over soup, Richard. You thought you were showing strength. But strength isn't taking, it's enduring. And you've endured nothing." The family stared, the room heavy with silence. Richard's humiliation was complete, his empire of lies shattered. And I stood there calm, steady, victorious. That night, as the storm eased, I sat on the porch swing with the dogs at my feet. The house behind me glowed warmly through the windows. I thought of the slap, of the bruise, of the humiliation. And I thought of this moment, his downfall, his desperate begging, his collapse in front of everyone. It wasn't revenge that warmed me. It was justice. Justice salted not with cruelty, but with truth. The morning after Richard collapsed in front of the family, the house was quieter than I had ever known it. The storm had passed outside, but inside, its echoes remained. Richard stayed locked in his room, Sandra whispered furiously on the phone, and the children tiptoed around the silence as though walking through a graveyard. I brewed my tea as always. The clink of the spoon against the porcelain cup was the only sound in the kitchen. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity is wasted on those who see love as weakness. I sipped slowly, waiting. Because I knew the end wasn't finished yet. By afternoon, the end arrived. Another car pulled into the driveway, not sleek and polished this time but heavy, grim. 3 men stepped out, different from the collectors before, but with the same aura of inevitability. With them came 2 uniformed officers. Sandra shrieked from the parlor when she saw them. Richard stumbled down the stairs, his face pale, his shirt wrinkled, his tie hanging loose. "This is a mistake," he said quickly, holding his hands out. "I can fix this. Just give me another chance. I'll get the money, I swear." One of the men stepped forward, his voice flat. "You've had chance after chance. Now it's over." The officers flanked him. Neighbors had gathered at the edge of the driveway, drawn by the noise, by the whispers that had been spreading for weeks. My family stood frozen in the foyer, Henry, Clara, cousins and nieces, all watching. And Richard, my son, stood at the center of it all, trembling. He turned to me then, his eyes wild, desperate. "Mom," he choked, his voice breaking. "Please. You can save me. Just sign the house over. Please, I'm begging you. Don't let them take me like this." All eyes shifted to me. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I stepped forward slowly, my cardigan neat,
my silver-gray hair bun steady, my hands folded. I looked at him, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had struck me over soup.
"No," I said quietly.
The word sliced through the room like a blade.
His knees buckled. Tears streamed down his face. "You can't do this to me. You're my mother." I held his gaze. "And you were my son."
But a son does not raise his hand against his mother.
A son does not treat her like property. A son does not sell her for salt. Gasps rippled. Whispers swirled.
Sandra's face went pale, her lips trembling.
The children clung to her robe, eyes wide with fear.
Richard collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. The officers pulled him gently to his feet, their hands firm on his shoulders.
And I stood still, my voice calm, my heart steady.
The men led him outside into the waiting car.
Rain had started again, soft and cold.
Neighbors whispered, some shaking their heads, others simply watching in silence. Sandra screamed, trying to run after him, but the creditors blocked her path. She fell to her knees in the mud, her silk blouse stained, her hair falling wild around her face.
The children cried.
Richard was shoved into the car, his face streaked with tears, his eyes hollow. The door slammed shut, sealing his fate. I stood in the doorway of the mansion, the heavy oak doors behind me, the warm glow of the foyer casting light onto the porch. My figure must have looked like stone, unmoving, unshaken, unbreakable. The car pulled away, tail lights glowing red against the wet pavement, carrying him into the night.
Inside, the family was silent.
Henry finally stepped forward, his voice low.
"You did what you had to do." I nodded faintly. "No. He did what he chose to do." Clara's eyes filled with tears. How could he hit you over soup?" I touched her hand gently. "It was never about soup. It was about greed. Salt was only the excuse. Greed was the reason."
Sandra fled the room, her sobs echoing upstairs. The cousins whispered, the neighbors drifted away, and slowly, the house grew quiet again.
But the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy with fear. It was steady, calm, dignified.
That night, I sat on the porch swing, the dogs at my feet, the air damp with rain. The mansion behind me glowed warm, safe, untouchable. I thought of the night he slapped me, the sting on my cheek, the soup untouched on the table. He thought that was the moment he proved his strength. He thought breaking me would make him powerful. But tonight, his desperate sobs in the foyer, his collapse in front of everyone, his ride into the dark, that was the true measure of who he had become.
Not strong. Not powerful. Broken.
And so, if you're watching this, remember, betrayal may come from the ones closest to you. Cruelty may arrive over something as small as soup. But strength is not in striking, it is in standing. My son thought he could humiliate me. He thought I would cower, fold, surrender my dignity for his greed. But in the end, it was his desperation, not mine, that was on display. His downfall, not mine, that the world witnessed. And my response, the quiet, steady refusal, was the one thing he never expected. So subscribe, share this story, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because maybe you've been struck down, humiliated, or betrayed. But know this, dignity outlasts cruelty. And sometimes, the smallest refusal is the greatest revenge.